RFI.
RFI.
法国国际广播电台
On 5 continents.
Barcelone.
Taipei.
Abidjan.
Riga.
Buenos Aires.
Freetown.
New York.
Tallinn. RFI.
Santo Domingo.
香港
Budapest.
Yerevan.
Cuenca.
London.
Kaboul.
Minsk. RFI.
Osorno.
Nairobi.
Dakar.
Kiev.
Prague.
Beijing.
La Paz.
New Delhi.
RFI.
RFI. The world and all its voices.
Yesterday, Sri Lanka rejected calls for an independent probe into war crimes committed during its 30-year civil war. The External Affairs Minister, G.L. Paris also said they did not need international policemen to solve internal issues. The country's war ended in May 2009, with both government troops and Tamil Tiger rebels accused of using brutal and inhumane tactics. Efforts at reconciling the country's culturally diverse population have been made, but as Sri Lanka's ambassador to Paris, Dayan Jayatilleka, tells RFI's Rosalind Hyams, they haven't been entirely successful.
Ambassador Dayan Jayatilleka from Sri Lanka, we're still talking about reconciliation in post-war Sri Lanka today. It's still a hot international subject because it seems that there's a struggle in this sense. What do you think is holding back the process of reconciliation in Sri Lanka today?
Well, there is a struggle, you're right. It's being slowed, you may say held back, but slowed by a number of factors. Firstly, the hangover of mentalities of 30 years of war. So there is a kind of siege mentality that has yet to be deconstructed and replaced by something else. The second thing is that the Tamil Parliamentary Party, the Tamil National Alliance, which is in fact the preeminent representative of the Tamil people of the North and East, has not yet seen fit to make any kind of criticism of the Tigers and of Mr. Prabhakaran. So there is a perception among the Sinhalese majority that the TNA has not established a clear enough firewall between itself and the secessionist lobbies located mainly in the Tamil diaspora. And now on the Sinhalese side, of course, there's hardline opinion. As you find in any society, there are ultranationalists within institutions and within civil society. So I would say the extremes in both ethnic communities, the majority and the minority, are an important factor of obstruction. Nonetheless, there is a process of dialogue between the Tamil National Alliance and the government of Sri Lanka.
Do you not think, though, that the onus is really on the government and observers? Sri Lanka are very concerned that if steps to reconciliation are not taken urgently, and particularly, for example, questions of accountability during the 30-odd years of the war, and particularly the last couple of years of the war crimes, etc., are not addressed, and that the government doesn't provide for institutions that are perceived as viable, credible, open and transparent. If the government doesn't put these in place, that there can be no hope for reconciliation and that there could be a resurgence of violence.
Well, I think that's really mixing up issues. Sri Lanka has been a democracy, however embattled a democracy, from 1931. As such, the main channel, arena, instrumentality of reconciliation has to be the democratic process, has to be parliament, has to be a dialogue between legitimate political parties and so on. So it will be in the domain of conventional politics. The issues of accountability, war crimes, etc., that's very complicated because if you take Brazil, it is just a few weeks ago that Brazil, which I consider an exemplary progressive democracy, has begun a commission of inquiry on the conduct of the junta which ruled Brazil from 1964 to 1988. There's a reason for this. There's a reason why Bangladesh is only now looking into certain atrocities committed 40 years ago. Societies take their own time. There are varying rates of maturation of these issues. And any reopening of who did what to whom can turn into a mutual slanging match. And reconciliation, I believe, has to be around the table between established political parties elected by the people.
Do you not think, though, that the Sri Lankan government is perhaps dragging its feet in setting up the kind of bodies, apart from the first commission that they set up, which could actually move towards, as you say, really tackling alleged war crimes later on?
Well, I can't think of any society which 2 years after the successful conclusion of a war over a secessionist or terrorist movement has a full-on inquiry into the conduct of its armed forces. Now, that does not mean, mind you, I use the word full-on, meaning that the entirety of the conduct of the armed forces during the closing, i.e. victorious stages of the war, is the subject of inquiry. I don't think that's going to happen. I can't see any place where it has happened. However, specific incidents and crimes in Sri Lanka have been investigated before and should be investigated. Now that's different. If there's incident A, B, C, which can be pointed to, and there are such incidents, I do believe that it's perfectly in order and in fact quite necessary for there to be an independent judicial process, a Sri Lankan process, but a judicial process of prosecution.
As you say, Sri Lanka still would not accept any kind of international assistance, advice, guidance, or particularly not an international inquiry.
Well, all the examples of international support have been in the case of failed states or of transitional justice, meaning a negotiated, externally mediated settlement of a conflict. Now, that has not been the case in Sri Lanka. What you have is an outright military victory by an elected democracy. So I really do not see the need for any international component. So I think Sri Lanka will probably handle this its own way and at its own time, whether under this or any other administration.
Ambassador Dayan Jayatilleka, Sri Lanka's ambassador to Paris. Thank you very much.
Shortwave listeners, if you're listening on the 31 or 41 metre band, you'll have to retune to the 25 metre band, 11995. Just a reminder that you can email us about any of our stories today on parislive@rfi.fr.